a moment more.
Hi, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm Isabel Gonzalez Whitaker, and I am a senior fellow for Encore. I'm excited to be here with you all today to talk about Light Years, a beautiful, life-affirming film with the director and some of its stars. For some of you who may not know what Encore is, Encore.org is a national nonprofit focused on bringing older and younger together to forge relationships, bridge divides, and solve big social problems. As a senior fellow, I'm going to be dedicating myself this next year to digging into the intergenerational alliances and tensions within the Latinx community. But first, we're going to talk about Light Years, and I'm so excited that Claire Marie Pankey will be joining us. You'll probably see her, I hope, on screen right now. She's the director and producer of Light Years, as well as some of the stars of the film, Dee, Paul, and then the daughters of Anita, who passed away, unfortunately, Gloria and Anika. So, but first, before I intro Claire, I hope that we can tune in just quickly to a beautiful trailer with the film.
I was born in 1916, and the high seas, so to speak, between Vieques and Puerto Rico. I could say I consider myself a New Yorker because I've lived here so many years, but we never lose our culture, you know. I have no disability in reinventing myself.
Hold it, I'm passing.
So many different paths that I have taken. I used to be a poet. I used to be a dancer. I used to be an actress. It's you in a different position, in a different place. You're creating yourself over again. Everyone has an inner light. And when I feel that inner light, I feel like I can do anything.
I didn't start to paint anything seriously until I was 51 years old. And I always felt guilty about not using my talent. I said, God's going to really be mad at me if I die. And he said, look, I gave you this talent and you bum, you never did anything with it. So I'm catching up now. I'm paying back. I was busy in my professional life, but I'm busier now in many areas, not just painting. So I've been coaching at Fordham.
Golf is a wonderful sport for teaching life values, keeping it in the now, and confidence and positive.
I'm a great putter and I love to putt. That's what Coach tells all of them.
They're wonderful young men and they inspire me.
There's a magical thing about old age. You become full of gratitude for life. So we need not give in to the ideas of other people about our aging. I really want to contribute as much as I'm able to and use whatever gifts I have to really serve. We want to be part of the heartbeat of society. I do love the African dance. It expresses something that I don't have any chance to express. It's the rhythm of basic life, and I love it.
Wow, it's so life-affirming. I love the trailer and I love the movie. And by the way, for those of you on the call, Duncan, who is the voice of God, is our tech guru, so he may be interjecting himself from time to time, and he will be helping us with the questions at the end. But first, we're going to talk to Claire. So Claire, you're a photographer, you're a documentary filmmaker, obviously an award-winning one. Your first film was aired on Discovery and on Nat Geo. You are also a neonatal intensive care nurse, which is an incredible dichotomy that we'll speak to in a minute. but obviously a life full of creativity and a life in your first film having to do with the beginning of life that is imbued with respect for all generations. So I'd like to start off by asking what got you into filmmaking? How did you make that pivot? Or maybe it's not even so much of a pivot, maybe it's sort of a cohabitation of your nursing and your filmmaking. I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, before technical difficulties.
It's Zoom.
Yeah, everybody will get a link to the trailer and you'll be able to see it smooth and everything. But I just wanted to thank everybody at Encore and the people who helped me make the film, especially Linda Hattendorf, my editor, who took a lot of material and pulled it together. And of course, the families and the people who are in the film. I'm actually really excited for everybody to hear from them. So I'll try to keep my comments brief so we can get to that. But, you know, I've always been a visual person. Some of us learn visually and I think visually and I process memories visually. And I took a high school photography class and it really opened me up to that whole craft and the beauty that a single photograph can tell a story, actually. I was an English major at Georgetown, but before that I had also taken a film study class in high school. It was an elective and my senior thesis was on film criticism. So you have these, you know, these two things, an interest in health and an interest in that. And then I changed to become an English major at Georgetown and really felt the power, the enduring power of story, even a story that was written hundreds of years ago, right? How it can move us, you know, transcending time and context and geography. After I was already a NICU nurse, I still kept this interest up, sort of like my own way of getting an MFA. I was taking classes in acting, art history, photography, and film. One of those film classes was a documentary class, and we had to pitch an idea. And so I thought about all the stories that I saw in the neonatal unit, or the NICU, as we call it. And so I pitched this idea for a film, and everybody was at the edge of their seats, wanted to know more. And that's how my first film was born. But, you know, the nursing and the filmmaking really do inform each other. In my case, they inform which stories I'm drawn to and which ones I really want to make. So.
Well, it's fascinating, and I'm glad that you brought up the first film that you made, because it's so similar in this film in that it's life affirming, right? Like it's not, sometimes it's not easy to watch. There's challenges. What is it about these two generations, right? The start of life moment and the later years that you're intrigued by and that you wanted to share with audiences?
Yeah, when we think about life stages, you know how sometimes you see like a step stool or you see like a staircase. And I think we all know it's a little bit more organic than that and a little bit more fluid. In fact, there's a lot of visual imagery in the film of ocean tides kind of coming in and going out. And it's a bit of an internal reference for me from a poem, a piece in the New York Times back in 1974 that my mother gave me, called More Light. It's by the poet May Sarton, and it talks about that organic line. And so while, you know, the NICU was starting where I knew, and the Light Years is about really kind of about the other end of life, but it's also about different stages in life. I mean, it's not just about or for older people, but I think the through line, or at the core, it's really how we respond to the changes and challenges, right, that we're faced. Like, how do you go into those nooks and crannies of the difficult things, the things we kind of want to avoid in life? And what is the meaning and the growth that you have there? And for me personally, it's also been very important to help the people in the film, the people who are sharing their story with me, how they find meaning themselves. You know, sometimes we lose our purpose, sometimes we lose our focus, but how do you keep growing and how do you keep redefining that? I look for something called what I call, you know, well, I think number one, also using people's authentic voices. And there's Paul for a sec. Hi, Duncan. That's Paul. Everybody, we'll talk to him a little bit later. So I'll get back on in a sec, but I'm just going to keep talking so you can hear me. So, you know, some films talk about something from the outside in, And I really wanted to talk from the inside out, have the people's voices really talk. I'm assuming everybody can still hear me. But I look for something called the so what factor, which is really, what is this about besides what it's about, right? I don't know whether to pin my video or how I'm supposed to get back on screen, but it's okay. Duncan will work it out. But
Yeah, everything's going. You got it, Claire. You're good.
all right, I got it. So the so what factor for A Chance to Grow was what happens when life hands you something you don't expect. The so what factor for Light Years is similar, but it's we're always writing our stories.
Right.
And the thing that's been so great is, that younger people also respond to this. And I wanted to use film not just about, especially documentary is so often about what's wrong with the world. And I wanted to use the medium to show better models, and that you don't need to be famous for your life to be of value. And that actually there are stories of grace and courage and extraordinary things everywhere.
And I'm glad that you sort of reframed it for me, right? And for the audience, that this is not a film about the end of life at all.
Right.
This is about lives well lived, right? And the vitality of life and purpose-driven lives, which for all of these subjects started at a very early age. And I definitely want to ask them about that. And intergenerationalism also plays into your first film as well. Can you talk a little bit about the intergenerational relationships that you had growing up, that informed sort of this orientation that you have to be respectful of our place within a larger ecosystem and context of others?
Yeah, and I think, well, first of all, I knew my grandparents really well, and I think you'll hear that from a lot of people. Knowing your grandparents, seeing them on a regular basis, really getting to know them and having them get to know me was really very formative for me. But I think even if it's not grandparents, it's like a great neighbor or a coworker. But I think the idea is also that we're not supposed to be siloed out. I mean, look at tribal cultures. Look at I don't like to generalize, but there are great models of, number one, respect for elders, and number two, multi-generational families. In a lot of cultures, I think of African cultures, I think of Latino and Hispanic cultures, Native American cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, some European cultures, think of Italian, where everybody's kind of together. I think the other point that I'd really like to have people really strongly feel is that when you see the scene of Dee dancing with the younger people in the film, she's not in the class to act young or to be young or to be with younger people. She's just being herself. And actually what happens is the younger people are drawn to her for exactly that reason, that she's just being herself, that it's a win-win situation. And the film is not just asking, how do you feel about turning 70, or how do you feel about turning 80 or 90, but hey, how do you feel about turning 30? How do you feel about turning 40 or 50? And the greatest joy for me is the people who are in their 20s and 30s who come up to me and say, I relate so much to this film. That just makes my heart
I mean, I want to revisit that, because one of the themes that I felt was very much evidenced by the way that they interacted with life, or they continue to interact with life. And I wrote it down because Anita says it in a quote, and it's about how creativity keeps you in the moment. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to sort of use yourself as best you can. Mm-hmm. And so there's this sense of really not defining yourself by age. So I want to talk about Anita's creativity, which I think is a through line to her story, Paul's devotion to family and mentorship, Dee's sense of agency and refusing to be stereotyped. Who else did you look or wish you could have included in this film? And how did you find these wonderfully rich subjects?
Well, I definitely, had different people besides Dee, Anita, and Paul. We're going to start with that. I'm going to start with, I met Dee a couple of years after I started the film through a dear family friend, Rosalina, who sent me an email and said, there's a woman in my dance class in Santa Barbara who you have to meet. So I flew out to Santa Barbara and I met Dee. And one of the times where I was out in Santa Barbara filming, I met a dear friend of Anita's daughter, Jane. So that's how I got to Anita. And of course, Anita was in New York. I filmed her in New York. Paul was actually a friend of my dad's, and knowing that I was looking for people, my father, they knew each other. And he said, you know, Paul Dillon's an artist. But initially I thought Paul was too young because he was in his early 70s. Later, I realized he's a great bridge to baby boomers and the idea of what you do post-retirement. But I actually, what cinched the deal for me was I was at the funeral of a friend's father, and Paul gave the eulogy, and I heard him speak, and I felt his open heart, and I was kind of sold. But they weren't the first people. The film has had a lot of different incarnations. You know, I've been doing this a long time. I went to a lot of conferences. Really at one point got into the work of Dr. Gene Cohen, who has wonderful books about the aging brain, really started to look at creativity. But there were two other men who just didn't work out for different reasons. And there was, I started working with a woman, Willie Mae Jackson, whom I just loved. Her grandparents were slaves. And I was really excited about incorporating that element of diversity, frankly. Unfortunately, Willie Mae went into heart failure at the end of one of my interviews with her. But luckily I'm a nurse and I got her into the healthcare system and we got her taken care of, but she couldn't finish the film. I did want to address a little bit of the diversity because I'm well aware that Light Years doesn't check all the boxes for diversity and representation, which are so important and have come up a lot lately. You know, I started the film in 2002. At that time, the filmmaking community was very much looking for films to incorporate more women crew members. So I worked really hard to do that. Of course, aging in general is a criteria for diversity, and especially to include films, a film about that's not just about death and dementia. I was really adamant about I was really excited about, I should say, Anita's Latina heritage and how important that was to her. But my hope overall is that I was able to transcend a little bit about what we look like. I mean, people have made certain assumptions that all three characters are very well off. It's not really the case, but it's part of how we bring, you know, stories to us and ourselves to stories. Ashton Applewhite, who does a lot of work with ageism, she's a wonderful spokesperson. She talks about how we're actually less alike as we get older. So it was a hard thing to pick which three, but I wanted to do just a few people, and I wanted to do them in depth. So
right. Well, thank you for mentioning that about the lens of diversity, and I know that that's something that we all respect and appreciate. And certainly as a Latina, I was touched and honored to see my culture reflected. But I'd like to your point about sort of the narratives of their lives transcending so much, right? And I touched on what I found to be some of the themes of their lives, but can you tell us what you feel the essence of each of them is, and maybe even more importantly, what you hope the audience gets from the viewing?
Well, I can try, because it's always
I know it's hard. Those are very rich lives.
To bring somebody up, and every time I used to say, oh, you know, Anita's so creative, and then I'd be like, but Paul's creative, but Dee's creative, and
absolutely,
Anita's so intellectual, but Dee's, you know, so they all kind of mix. But for me, Dee's story is very much driven by her intellect, her completely, you know, innate intellect, and her values for things like peace and justice, and which led her into journalism, and her real passion for environmental protection, which now goes down to her children. And she's very much in love with education and is just a natural teacher. For me, Paul is all heart, and he kind of takes this idea of the retired corporate manager who plays golf and flips it on its tail, giving it, you know, great depth and meaning. And I think that meaning comes from his role as a mentor for younger men. He's deeply rooted in family and in spirituality, which are two things that don't always get enough light, but are very important to people as they get older. And I just felt like he shares his soul with everybody he encounters, including those of you he doesn't know. Anita is, I could do like an 8-part series on each of these people, but Anita is so
I watched that.
yeah, Anita is so beautiful, and I speak about her in the current present tense because she's very much still with me. But it was very sad for me to not have her see the finished film, or my parents see the finished film. But her beauty is kind of grounded in her family and her Puerto Rican roots. She's very grounded in that. She was very forward thinking, and she also, by the way, like everybody said, they never heard her say anything bad about another person. How many of us can say that?
Wow.
Always working, yeah. And I can vouch for that. But
may I never be interviewed for one of your documentaries.
But she was always working. She was always creating. She was always nurturing young performers. And her Latina heritage and her Latina identity was such a part of her. She used to say, my body's in New York, but my soul is Latina. And as you said, Isabel, it's I can tell you what they represent for me, but they're going to represent something different for the people who are watching the film. And my hope is that feeling, of my kind of film mission, which is what do we have in common versus what separates us, kind of plows through. And that's why it's, somebody who's a 95-year-old Latina can have somebody who's 20 years old, African-American living in Harlem, relate to her. And that's been somebody who's come up to me and be like, I related the most to Anita, which is surprising, but delicious.
Well, and I think it's, you're sharing the legacies, and you've found and unearthed and packaged the legacies for each of these individuals. But the film itself is also a legacy, and a way for people to look at what it means to live a life well lived, to live richly, and to have the lodestar of purpose. And whether that's through creativity or activism, for forever, not to be defined by any sort of societal ideations around what should and shouldn't be. But talk a little bit, you mentioned 2002. I don't think anybody here realizes that this was a multi-decade effort for you. So can you talk a little bit about your personal dedication to this project and some of the highs and lows?
I'd have a sophomore in college by now. It's been a long time for both me and the people who are in the film. We've all faced, different problems, health problems. We've all gotten a little older. I've aged into the cohort, but I think two of the things that have kept me persisting so much are really belief in how much people need to see dimensionalized images of aging, not stereotypical, like something that's not easy to just put in a box, either pro or con, either cute old people or, on death's door.
And in fact, he says that at the top of the piece, just like,
I'm learning from
people want to typecast me, and that's impossible.
Yeah. So I you learn that, but also the timeliness of it. There's a big demographic shift going on, not only in the United States, but across the world, of boomers and then the millennials behind them. So you're going to have more and more people who are 65 plus, and our idea of later life is so outdated and so marinated in stereotypes and in some cases a lot of myths. My lows, you asked me about highs and lows. My lows were definitely all related to money. And I don't mean to be that frank, but I mean, it's really hard to raise money, and trying to be visible. Sometimes it was hard to watch other films that were similar to mine, or, in 2006, there was a beautiful film about a choir out in Massachusetts called Young at Heart. And there's been so many films, one that you guys highlighted it at here on Encore, Lives Well Lived, great title, Sky Bergman, and so many others that have been very moving. And I'm all for more films about this, but that was a little challenging because it was a long time. Keep in mind, I was also working as a nurse.
Sure.
And, I was also working as a nurse doing this, dealing with my own family situation, my father who had an experience with dementia, my mother's situation. And so life happens, right? But I would say the highs are definitely the privilege of knowing these people, of getting to know them. And I'm close with all of their families. And And there's another takeaway where I've gotten this gift of re-envisioning my own aging and what's possible and how I can keep evolving. So
Yeah, I find it very refreshing to see. It's certainly what I've gleaned from my own relationship with my mother, who, like you, has passed, like your mother has passed. I now have good role models, right? This film presents beautiful role models that we can evolve into. So it's a counter narrative to popular thinking that's not going to be so popular. The popular thinking is going to go by the wayside, to your point, as this demographic grows in importance and just grows in population. So can we just talk for just because it informs so much of everything that touches our lives in this very moment, the pandemic. And I know you're passionate about ageism. Can you talk just briefly about how do you feel older generations suffer disproportionately, the reflection back of us as a culture in the way that we handled collectively the pandemic as it relates to older individuals? What's your perspective, especially considering you work within a hospital system too?
That's a 2-hour answer. But
you have 1 minute.
Yeah, it was 2 hours, and I'm so anxious to get to the other cast members too. But I think it's also Ashton Applewhite who said it's not, what COVID has done is not create ageism, it's revealed it.
Great
And
point.
it's revealed this idea early on when you'd hear or you'd read something that said, well, they lived a good life.
Right.
Really? I also work in a vaccination clinic, and some people are comfortable with vaccines and some people aren't, but people are crying as they get their vaccine. There's this clinging, people aren't ready to just sign off. It's so dismissive. And it's similar to ableism or racism or gender, discrimination, that anybody is less valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It drives me crazy. But I think that some of it has to do with how much caregivers, it also tilts to me a little like, are we looking at the caregivers in our life, the people who aren't paid a lot, who are either in our families or are outside our families? What are the venues where if you cannot house your intergenerational family, you have neither the means nor the money or the physical place to do that? How much support do nursing homes and assisted living care facilities get, and how are they seen? But also, I think it really boils down to value. And one other thing I'd just say, when you think about Fauci and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and now Biden, Dr. Cohen, who's referenced in the film, talks a lot about the aging brain and how when you get a little bit older, your brain actually is better at judgment and decision making. And I think that, in some ways, I feel kind of excited that we're in the hands of people who, well, I'm not going to get political, but, it's the idea that people with experience and that later life has gifts to give, and it's not just about what gets taken away.
Right. I think that's wonderful. And to your point, this revealed so much about where we value teachers, older generations, caretakers. So I think we're learning a lot through this pandemic. And I know we want to move on to the next chapter of this discussion, but what's next? Where are you gonna direct your next documentary and your creative output?
Yeah, well, I always have film ideas, but some people are directors or producers, and they're hired to work on a film by producers. Or this was something that I really worked on myself on many different levels, including shooting a lot of it and raising the money and doing all that stuff, which I'm still doing. But I want to be with this for a little while. I want to really explore right now. For everybody to know, I'm exploring possible distribution. I'm not quite ready to send it out to the world because the distribution world from COVID and from other things has shifted a little. So I'm exploring that, but I am eager. I have a long list of outreach ideas and different ways and ideas that I can reach both groups and individually and also a broader range. So I'm going to be working with this for a little while for now, and then we'll see.
We're all here to support that effort. So all through 400 people that are on this call.
Yeah, there'll also be a link later on, I think,
yes,
to my website and to an email. It's in the chat if you it'll be later if you
and watch the trailer. And I'm not mistaken, but the video, the movie will be available with the special link as well for another day or two.
The Encore link will be available
Okay.
through the weekend. I'm going to leave it up till midnight on the 1st.
Yeah, they're
So
putting
you
it in the
have till the
comments
1st
too.
to look at it, and you can get in touch with Encore if you need help with that link.
Perfect. Well, I hope you'll stay on for the second part of our discussion, which is with some folks that we're big fans of. So Duncan, I hope you can help me bring into view Dee and Paul and Anita's, okay, there's Dee, Anita's daughter, one of her daughters, and her granddaughter. So that's Gloria and Anika. So there we go. We have them there. I mean, I think I just need to throw this question out to Dee. I'll start with you. And before I throw it out, I'll remind people who may not know yet your history that you have led such an incredibly interesting life, from Charlie Chaplin to Noel Coward to, Gloria Vanderbilt. You were a dancer, you're a writer, you're a journalist, a professor, a lover of nature. It's really wonderful to see how, in a way, revolutionarily, you led your life. What did participating in this film mean to you, Dee?
Well, we've had, I can only say, an enormous century. Overwhelming change, overwhelming wisdom, overwhelming danger, all of that. Everything that demands attention, respect, and action, And so I feel very rich that I have seen so many different, and enjoying the idea that maybe I could share it.
I love it. Paul, you for the first part of your life, you were a corporate man, which I'm sure many in our audience can relate to, but you have a beautiful quote saying that God gave you a gift and that you didn't want to die without squandering that gift. And that gift, of course, is painting, and you excel at painting. And of course, golf and your love of golf and mentoring young people, and your family, your devotion to family just shines through. What did it feel like revealing so much of yourself in this film?
Well, I really wasn't aware that I was doing that.
Surprise.
I was having fun, really. And, my players, they enjoyed being in the movie. I know that. They let me know that. And my own family, they have participated. Paul, I couldn't do any of this without him, or Timmy, or a number of the boys, and Mary Kate, my only daughter. It's been Claire is a joy. I love her, and I love her family. Her parents were wonderful people. Her dad was head of St. Vincent's Hospital in New York. Her mother is a joy. You would fall in love with her. And her siblings are all nice and sweet. And it's just been a great gathering of great people. And I've really enjoyed being part of it.
That's wonderful. Gloria and Anika, your mother obviously can't be with us, though I like to think that she is with us. Can you share a little bit? Her expression of creativity, her award-winning poetry, her activism for Puerto Rico, her own, like Dee, experiences in Hollywood and theater. What was it like for you all to watch this film, and what do you think she would hope viewers would get from seeing her life in this film?
Anika, are you going to speak first, or am I?
Well, okay, I'll speak first. I think that she would want people to know that it's just a number and that life goes on and you have to recreate yourself over and over again and never give up. She was the most positive person I have ever met. She could take a tragedy and only see the positive aspects of it. She was close to death one time, and it was a horrible thing, but instead of looking at the bad part of it, she saw it as something freeing and beautiful, which is amazing to me. So yes, I think she wants people to be inspired by this, just as she was by her own life.
Gloria, I'd love to hear from you as well, also because you're the granddaughter, right? And
I'm the daughter.
I mean, I'm sorry, Anika, the granddaughter.
Anika.
Anika, thank you. You know, the strong gene pool of creativity, you know, you are also a poet. What was it like for you? And do you think your peers, can you speak a little bit for your peers in your generation to watch your grandmother in this film and just to watch this film more generally? Is Anika on?
I don't know.
Anika just needs to,
she's muted. Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
Oh, I think she's still muted.
No, I should be on now. Hi.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi. Well, first of all, I have to thank Claire because this film is such a gift to those of us whose the subjects were our families, you know, and I lived with this movie. I did the music. And so I lived with the film for a really long time, getting to know Dee and Paul, and of course, seeing Anita. She was surrounded by so many people in the house, so many young people. We were together all the time. And there was a thing about her, again, just the redefining what age is, redefining what it was to be a woman of color during that era. And she trailblazed her way through life, you know, defying all odds. Nothing was too much for her, you know, and she was fearless and she taught us to be fearless. I think what she probably would want people to take away from the film is her ability to embrace change. She embraced anything that was new that came her way, in the world, in music and poetry, in life, in politics. Anita always said, you know, you can't fight change. You have to go with it. You have to lean into it and bring your own knowledge, but also receive knowledge from other people. And it was her whole life was very symbiotic with the world. She was organic and earthy, but also really loved the classics. And so there was this combination of her, of just this ball of light is how I would describe it. So my relationship with her and all my friends, you know, and a lot of people around her. So I think people were, you know, it's the same way you were talking about Dee in the dance class, you know, and everybody wanted to be around her. Anita was the same way. She really was a magnet for younger generations to be around. And we all wanted to learn from her and she wanted to learn from us. That's what was beautiful.
And I see a lot of commonalities, right, between these three lives documented, a lot of leaps taken. So I'd like Dee to ask you a question because you've taken a lot of leaps, literal and figurative, through your life, from dance to journalism to living in California in Yosemite, hanging out with Ansel Adams. What, you know, so many people are so scared to take leaps and to pivot. Why have you been, what do you attribute your fearlessness to?
Well, I came from a family. My mother was a singer and an opera singer and trained in folk music. And my father was an actor on Broadway, first man, leading man. So I came from a pretty brave family, I guess. But I never feared a performance or anything like that, anything having to do with it, you know. So my friend Tree said to me the other day, I gave up dancing. And I gave up singing, she said, because I was so full of stage fright. I just froze. I said, well, everybody has that. That's the common thing they know about it. And that didn't really please her, but it was, kind of bad news.
I love that attitude.
Some people will not do it, and I was perfectly baldly ready to do it, whatever was required.
I love that. Any regrets?
What?
Any regrets? You know, you've lived doing, like you said, to your point, like you're fearless in jumping in.
Well, right now, everybody that has been around education in any way is very concerned, because I feel that the whole failure of the voters was because they didn't have an education. And that's because the government does not put enough money into educating, just plain telling you how it is, first to last. And they are going to do it now. Biden is determined. He's going to have them do it. So we're in a happy time.
I love hearing that that you continue to be engaged and passionate about politics and education.
Couldn't help it. And know the wonderful young people that we have in this country.
Absolutely. Paul, we're gonna throw to questions in a minute, but in the meantime, I wanted to ask you about painting and that leap that you took when you said, you know what, I have this gift. I haven't picked up a paintbrush until I think you said either 51 or 61 years old. Why, Paul, did you wait so long? And what did it feel like once you dove in and started painting?
Well, I'm surprised that I could paint as well as I did. And I started earlier than that, really. I was in my late 40s. And people recognized that I could draw very well and get likenesses of people. So I was commissioned to paint people who were being honored. And I was nervous about it. I thought, my God, suppose it doesn't look, suppose it looks like Isabel instead of Fred, you know. And I worried about it. My solution was to pray over it. I said, all right, God, you gave me this talent and I've neglected it, I admit. I don't want to make it up. But I need your help. We're going to do this project. But I need you to bless it and help me to get through it. And he did.
He sure
Am
did.
I amazing? He did.
And then some.
And I prayed over every painting I've ever done.
Yeah.
And it worked out.
I appreciate that spirituality has been something that's been very important to you. Do you feel that spirituality was something that was imbued in you as a child? Is that something that you lost and then found again, or was it always with you? I don't recall from the film.
Well, no, it was there from early childhood. My dad was he'd get me up early in the morning to go to mass for his mother at St. Catherine's in Pelham, New York. And it would be dark out. I'd say, where are we going? He said, we're going to mass. And, you know, the power of his example was tremendous. But it continued. You know, I've always had God in my life, and I wouldn't dare to go very far without him.
Thank you. Gloria and Anika, can you tell me a little bit about your mother's passion for Latin culture, how you saw that expressed in the household? If you feel that Claire actually accurately reflected it, and how it has informed how you all move through the world, your Latinness.
Very much so. My first language was Spanish, and all those things, R con R, cigarro, R con R. Oh, I learned all that from her.
Wow.
Yes, and she gave me a love of Puerto Rico. I was born in New York. I'm a New Rican, but in my heart, I am Puerto Rican, really. And it's interesting. It's always been a part of me. And it's because of her love for the country, for the island, especially Vieques, which we went to visit. And we went with Claire. Oh, we had a wonderful time. Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, always. And oh, in fact, I went to boarding school for 4 years. And when I came out, I had forgotten Spanish. And she was shocked. And I thought, oh my God, if I don't learn it immediately, she's going to send me back to boarding school. So I went and I taught myself again. It was in there, so it just came out. But it was very important part.
And Nika, how has it informed who you've become as an adult, that exposure to Latin culture and being Latina?
I think it's very important. I've always identified as a Puerto Rican Jew, so I have both sides. But all the work that I've done in my life and all the people that I've been around, I've always spoken about my ethnic background because I don't look it. I can pretty much, as they say, pass as white, as all Americana. And I felt it important to bring to any conversation, any project I did, any relationship I had, the roots of my heritage, of my Latino roots. And Anita always talked about it. Puerto Rico was so much a part of our food, our celebrations, when we would go to New York, all the dancing we would do. And it continued through work that we did in poetry together and a beautiful musical we did together, honoring the Puerto Rican settlement of America. So it's been incredibly
significant. Tell everybody the name of that play because it's great.
The musical is called Temple of the Souls.
That's right.
Anita wrote the libretto. My sister and I helped with the book. Lorca directed it. And then my husband and I composed the music for it. And it was a family affair. We didn't want anyone to think of it as being nepotism because we're all professionals. But Anita, again, continuing to keep that story alive and having her own children work and produce in it, and then bringing it to future generations, that history of Puerto Rico and the Taino Indians.
It's an advocacy that I very much respect and was glad to see on screen. And I'm glad to see that you're continuing that. So I think we need to open it up to questions because I know that the audience I see in the chat have a lot of questions for our panelists. Duncan, do you want to let us know how this should best move forward?
Yeah, so if you have questions, add them to the chat box and I will help surface them. But we can go ahead and get started because we got a couple as people were speaking. The first one is from Betsy, and this is a question for Claire. You already mentioned a couple of other films about older adults. You talked about Young at Heart and Lives Well Lived, but Betsy wants to know if there are other films about older adults that inspired you and that we should add to our lists.
I'm having a little brain freeze, Betsy, and I have an entire folder of them. There was one called Nine Good Teeth. Nine Good Teeth was probably 10, 15 years ago, and it was about one woman. And that's sort of what I was talking about. You can have a film about one person and it doesn't represent everything, but if the director and the subject does a good job, you can sort of transcend that. And it was just about this woman and her life. It was made by her grandson. That's one. There's Surfers for Life was one that was about this group of surfers that just continue to do things and try to avoid that word, I still do something, I still do something. Do you still brush your teeth, Oh, I have so many of them. I'm sorry, I'm spacing out a little. If you email me, I'll give you a whole list of them. There's so many of them. There's one called Big Sonia by a filmmaker friend of mine. and Leah Warshawski, and it's about her grandmother, her Jewish grandmother, who ran this sort of tailor shop in this old I think it's in Los Angeles, this old, it might be someplace else, but you know, this old mall, and they were closing down the mall, and what she was going to do with her whole life. There are so many of them, and I'm just so focused on the people I'm looking at right now that I have this depth. But I will say that I don't feel competitive about those. I wasn't saying I could feel competitive. I feel inspired. Every once in a while, I'd want to wave my flag and say, I've been working on this since 2002. But I think it's important to build and grow and share audiences and share inspiration, because we're not all reading books. Younger generations are learning through film, are learning through story. So it's really important that the stories they learn about are not just about their own lives, and not just about tech, and not just about things that are right in front of them or Facebook, but things that are broader and wiser, and kind of bridge those generations. So if you want a comprehensive list, I'll send you my folder.
Thanks so much, Claire. And Isabel, I'm going to pass this one to you just so that you can kind of manage who responds. But this is a question from Jack, who's wondering about the participants of the film and their thoughts on the role and significance of curiosity in their lives.
Such a great question. I mean, I think that all three of them are so curious, or else they, you know, that seems part and parcel for the lives that they've lived. But Dee, do you want to go first and talk a little bit about the role of curiosity and how it's informed all the turns and leaps that you took?
Yeah, yes. I don't know anything scientific about it, but surely it is a very strong impulse. Now, I have a visiting cat, and that cat is getting familiar with everything in the house. It takes its time, checks it out, looks it over carefully, and settles back. It wants to know what it's getting into. And I certainly share that, and who doesn't? And I love, the happiest moment in my life was when I started to work for newspapers. And I was working for the California Farmer, which is obsolete by now, 100,000 readers though. And I got in that office and I thought, I belong here. I'm home. I love this. Because what is it? It's really careful, educated curiosity about people. And I'm reading now in the Times about the world. They're on India, they're in China, they're everywhere they need to be. God knows who they are and how attacked they are, how dangerous it is, but they're doing it. And it's what I think is a very noble profession.
Well, as a journalist, I agree. And you can't be a good journalist or a documentary filmmaker without curiosity. So, Paul, what about you and curiosity?
My daughter?
Wow.
Paul.
I guess I've always been curious. You know, I love sports, and football and baseball were also part of my life growing up. And I was curious to see how well I could do, and how well my teams would do, because I went into coaching after, and that curiosity kind of launched me. But you know, I look at Claire and I see her tenacity. Gosh almighty. I mean, she has worked so hard on getting this film to where it is now. And they don't have her name spelled right. Neither the first name or the second name is spelled correctly. But she is deserving of, and Dee, she's the epitome of charm. That woman has got it. And it's a gift. It's a rare gift when someone has that kind of charm. And our Claire, she has, by the way, they corrected the spelling of the first name now on this thing,
It's okay.
but they left out a letter, an H in the second name.
There's no H. There's no H.
Huh?
There's no H.
No? Okay, I'm wrong then. I'm bad for me, God. Well, she's got charm. I know that. I wanted to make sure that the world knows what charm and tenacity and boy, there's no quit in that lady. Not a bit of it.
It's great. I love how protective you
The
are.
curiosity of just watching people grow that way.
Sure.
Thank you, dear.
Gloria, do you want to speak to Anita's sense of innate curiosity?
Yes, unlike the cat that was killed by curiosity, she was, not only curious, but she had to conquer whatever it was she didn't know. You know, there was this sense of, yes, I want to know that. And she was one of the best readers. I mean, she read constantly. We were surrounded by books. And I have several of her books and there are markings in the margins and circles and questions, and she argues with the writer. Yes, she was just incredible. And she passed that on to all of us. We're all like that.
It's beautiful.
A gift, yes.
Thank you, guys. Duncan, do we have time for another question? I defer to you all.
Can I mention something quick?
Sure, Claire.
I just don't want the whole conversation to end without me mentioning, if you watch the film again, listen to Annika's music. I've had a lot of people mention the music. I feel like the film would not be what it is without her and her husband Dean's work. I mean, it completely sealed everything together. And I would listen to a music cue and cry, because there's just like a photograph can tell a story, so can a song. And so I just didn't want to go without mentioning that.
I'm glad you did. And I love that there's, that there's an integration in this, that this effort was collaborative in a way, right? You're intertwined in their lives and they in yours. It's beautiful. Duncan, I defer to you as our timekeeper. Where are we?
We're right at 4 o'clock, so we got to let people go. But I do want to say before you close us out, Isabel, I'm going to put the link and password to your private screening to see Light Years. That's in the chat box. You'll also get that in the follow-up email. But I wanted to put that there because I know some people have trouble getting emails from us. So take a look at that. Yeah, and I'll pass it back to you, Isabel, to close us out.
Well, Dee, Paul, Annika, Anika, Gloria, I apologize. Claire, Annika, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. It is a beautiful film and it's a beautiful legacy to these lives and to, it's just a testament to purpose-filled lives. So thank you. I wanted to remind everybody that there will be an email going out that will include Claire's contact information, the information about watching the film. And then there will be another event for those interested, a conversation between Encore.org CEO Mark Friedman and Justin Coughlin, who is a young blind prodigy who was featured in the 2014 documentary Keep On Keeping On, and that'll be on February 19th. And thank you all for joining us. This has been wonderful and inspiring. Thank you,
And
Claire.
thank you to you, Isabel.
Thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you, dear.
My honor, really. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Claire.
Safe.
Talk to
Yes,
you all soon.
Claire.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all for being here. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you all soon.